Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Thriving Adoptees podcast. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Kim Smith. Looking forward to our conversation today, Kim. I know that you have uh, some excitement and nerves, but we we really will look after you. It's going to be safe,
I'm
all
looking
safe.
forward to it, actually.
Cool. Good on you. So Kim, she has three kids by
Yes.
adoption, three boys.
Yes.
Handful, three boys are always a handful.
Yes. Very
Yeah.
much.
And she also runs Cradled in Grace, an agency, adoption agency too. So the first question I love to ask Kim is thriving. What does thriving mean to you, Kim?
For adoptees, I think just being able to process their adoption and have a strong identity.
Yeah. And you and for you, what does thriving as an adoptive mom, as a mom, as a human being?
Oh, goodness, I don't know. I'm just, I think feeling confident and again, just being comfortable, I guess, in your own skin and enjoying life. I don't know.
Yeah, yeah, comfortable. I'm doing a little slide at the moment. I was doing a slide earlier on today, and it was kind of like five themes of thriving and
Hmm.
comfortable in our own skin
Yeah.
was one of those five themes. Yeah,
Yeah, that makes
for
sense.
sure, comfortable and yeah. What does it mean to you that that
Comfortable in my own skin.
yeah
Again, confident in myself as a mother, in my career, just as a wife, all the roles I fill. I think just
yeah
being confident and feeling secure in that. And I
yeah
think
yeah
going back to the adoptee, the same thing, just feeling secure in where
secure
they are and
yeah
their identity.
secure secure in their family,
Hmm. And their
secure
identity and who they
in
are.
their identity and who they are. Yeah. How do we create those? How do we create those families, those environments
I
where
think for my kids, it's been being able to voice their feelings in a safe way and not kind of as I think as adoptive parents sometimes want to kind of prescribe how an adoptee is supposed to feel instead of letting them feel what they feel and kind of tell them how they're supposed to react to things. And I think for us, it's been giving space to say it's okay to feel a certain way. It's okay to have that push pull that comes with adoption with I love you, but I wish I could have stayed in my birth family, those kind of feelings, just allowing space for those to happen and validating those feelings.
yeah yeah it's huge, isn't it? Because invalidating somebody's feelings. Um,
Yeah, I think when you see all the, online adoptees who are frustrated or, upset about it, it's often because they've been told you should feel lucky, you should feel a certain way, or just that lack of connection with their family of origin and understanding where they came from and what their story is. So I think for us, that's just been really important for our kids.
yeah, I think there's a fundamental disconnect, isn't there?
Hmm.
You know, if we think of pre-primal wound days, right, which was only 1993 that book was published. So before then, there were these parents. Trauma knowledge wasn't what it is today,
Sure.
and so these parents were adopting, thinking it was rainbows and unicorns. Their kids didn't feel that way, and so there's a fundamental mismatch between the expectations that have been set up
Yeah.
within the adoptive parent and the actuality of how
Yeah.
the child
I
feels.
did some work years ago. Oh, gosh, it was when my oldest was a toddler, so it was 2010 or so, and it was when Ohio adoption records had just been opened up. And I worked for Catholic Charities, and my job was to take their files and review it and sit down across from adoptees who are, 40, 50 years old and tell them their story for the first time. And I think the consistent thing I heard from adoptees when they're coming from the maternity home days when adoptions were all hush hush and the mother knew nothing, the child knew nothing about their story. And it was always just, I just wanted to know why she did it. I wanted to know where I came from, what my history was. Um, because eventually they almost always found out they were adopted. It came out because they heard the aunt and mom in the kitchen whispering or something, but they would find out, and that was all they ever wanted was that connection and that ability to just process and understand why it happened.
Yeah. Two very different, to me, it seems two very different parts of
Hmm.
the um, the trauma or the condition, if you like, right? There's on one hand, uh, there's that um, pure feeling,
Hmm.
like the pure feeling of loss,
Hmm.
uh, or this lady smells different,
Hmm.
right? So there's that sense of that there's that pure sense thing, and then there's the questions
Yeah.
that
I don't feel
that kind of
right,
come
so
out.
why? Yeah.
Yeah, there's the why. Um, is it right to am I right to separate the kind of the feelings from the questions? Do you know
I
what I
think
mean?
so. I think because I think people don't recognize that loss in an infant. Oftentimes, they think that, okay, if you adopt from the foster system or if you adopt an older child, they're going to feel that loss. But I've had people question, how could your children miss their mother if they were placed in your arms at birth? But they do. I can remember my middle son at about 3 years old saying he's Marshallese, so he's darker skinned, and I can remember he would say, "I miss my brown mommy." And, people would question, how can he miss her? He was with her for 48 hours. But he did. He felt that sense of loss. And I think that was his 3-year-old way of trying to express that sense of loss and longing that he didn't quite understand what it was, but he knew he missed something
Yeah,
and longed for something.
yeah. And how did you feel off the back of that?
I mean, it can be a gut punch more because I care for my child, than any kind of feelings of insecurity towards her. It was more like, I hate that he feels this and I can't do anything about it. I went to an adoptee coach that we use with Cradled in Grace and talked with her, and her recommendation was to talk through it with him. So we had a conversation, well, I'm sorry that hurts. If she was here, I'm sure she would tell you she loved you and give you a hug. What would you want to say to her? And we just had a conversation that way. We also created a box for him that he has mementos. I, showed him some things that I had from her from when he was placed with us. Even because he was born in Hawaii, they really aren't directly connected to his mother, but they're connected to his birth. And so he has some things from Hawaii in that box, and he still treasures that very much and will get it out every now and then.
Yeah, yeah. So it's about his needs, right?
Hmm.
Not
Absolutely.
not
Yeah.
about the gut punch that you
No,
that you
absolutely. It was about meeting his needs.
yeah. And did the gut punches become less painful?
Yeah, I think as you get used to just understanding that this is just part of it, probably um processing it with my eldest when he really struggled probably the most so far, but he's also the oldest. But when he was about 8, he really struggled with his identity and um went through a phase where he was very angry, and we had a lot of problems until we really sorted out what was at the root of the problem.
Yeah,
Um, and so once I really understood that and how he was processing, I think it made it a lot easier for me for all of the children. In his case, it was that push pull of, I wish my family had stayed together. and I wish it never had happened, but at the same time, I want you and you're my mom. And he was just being really ugly to me. And finally, one day I said, "Why are you being so mean to me?" And he started crying and he said, "Because every time I look at you, I think you're my real mom." And I think he felt guilty. He felt guilty loving me, but then the more we process, we realize that he did long for her as well. And he didn't know what to do with that. That's really a complex thing for an 8-year-old to process.
Yeah.
I love you, but I also wish I was with her, and both can't coexist, but yet that's how I feel. And that was really
Yeah.
hard for him. But he was also angry at her, because he felt rejected. And so it was just a lot of emotions he was carrying towards both of us, and he didn't know how to make that all work.
Yeah. Sounds like really adult conversations to be having with
With an
him.
8-year-old, yeah,
Yeah. And
exactly.
we
They're
and
big
free.
grown-up feelings,
Yeah.
and an 8-year-old's mind is not ready to process that. But yet, he's a deep thinker, and so there he was trying to figure it out, but really not having the maturity to work that out himself.
Yeah.
So we had to finally get him to a place where he felt safe talking about it and open. And in his case, it meant, seeing somebody, getting in therapy. And I remember it was very slow in the beginning, just building a relationship of trust and him going a couple days a week to talk with someone who he felt safe with.
Yeah.
And then slowly adding us into the conversation as his parents. And eventually it ended up a FaceTime meeting with his birth mom, his therapist, and us all in the same room with him. And that's kind of what helped resolve it finally.
Wow. Wow.
But it was definitely a process.
A definite process. But you'd started the pretty grown-up conversations with him
Mhm.
at 3, right?
No, this is a different one. This is
Oh,
the
sorry.
other, my older child. Yeah.
Yeah.
The other, the funny thing is the one who you're referring to with at 3 years old, he really has not said much since then. When we bring it up now, he doesn't want to talk about it. And I allow for that too. Sometimes he's not someone who wears his emotions on his sleeve as much as my older child. And in his case, he's happy with his box. He goes and kind of processes in his own way on his own. And, we're there for him, but he chooses to keep it more to himself. My older son, has been more open, especially once he started doing that counseling. And, now he actually shares his story pretty openly with people. But it's been his choice to gradually get to that point.
Yeah. Incredible amounts of patience here and communication, Kim.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's one of the biggest things is just really communicating and always letting your child know that it's okay. People assume they might know that, but I think sometimes it has to be said out loud, that it's okay if you feel hard feelings. It's okay for you to love her. It's okay. And that's what it amounted to when we all talked in the same room when his birth mom was on the thing. She was able to say to him, "I chose them for you. And you're living the life I wanted for you, and I'm proud of that." And it's okay to love her, but I could also say it's okay to love her too. You can love both of us, and that's all right. And
Yeah.
it's okay to sometimes wish that this didn't happen to your family, and that's okay too.
Yeah. Huge, huge stuff.
Yeah, yeah, it's big stuff, and I think it's really important that parents be prepared for those conversations because they're going to come up pretty consistently
Yeah.
with clients and friends who've adopted. I see it. It's 3 or 4 is when a lot of kids start to notice and understand what it means. Even if you've always been open, that's when they start to process it very commonly. And then usually again around 8 to 12, you see another shift. But I think, if you look at child development, 8 to 12 is when you're beginning to develop your identity.
Yeah.
And so now it's a whole new thing because now you're trying to help understand your identity in that aspect.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned identity a couple of times. What does it mean to you? What does identity
I
mean
think
to you?
for my son, we're Christians, and for him, it's been identity developing his identity in Christ. that he's God's child first and foremost and created that way. But then also just understanding that he's gonna have, he's our son, and there are things, he belongs here, but he also belongs in that family. There are ties to that family, and that's okay. It's important for him to understand, what did I get from my birth mom? What skills? I think kids like hearing those kind of things sometimes. Oh, you're good at piano. You got that from your grandmother. Your eyes, you look like your father. It's important to him to have those links, and it's kind of trying to meld all that into who he is and understand that it's okay that it comes from two places.
Yeah.
You don't have to be one or the other.
All of the above. Yeah. What
Mhm.
what does what does being God's child, what does that bring them?
I think just reminding him that he was created the way God designed him, and that's a beautiful thing no matter what. And it because in some cases, I think with kids, and not to share too much of his story, but
Of course.
there's some things in his parents' background that I think he struggled with. Like, am I going to be like that? Am I going to do these things because that's where I came from? And having him understand that they made choices. Um, that doesn't mean that sometimes we can't make one choice and get caught up in addiction or illness or things or poverty, but they made choices, and God created him a certain way, and he is who he is, and he's made perfect. Um,
Yeah.
there's nothing flawed or wrong with him. And I think always reassuring him of that. And he got certain traits from them, but he also has choices to make, and he's being raised in a certain environment, and that also affects who he is. And
Yeah.
um,
What helps him see that? What's helps him see that perfection? Because it's one thing for us to
Yeah,
tell, yeah,
I think sometimes he doesn't. I think constantly reminding him of that. Um, you know, he needs to be told a lot that you are worthy and you are okay. Um, it's been a struggle for him a lot, I think. And I think you probably, recognize in what you've done through your career that adoptees struggle with that identity sometimes of rejection, of feeling like, am I worthy?
yeah,
Is there something wrong with me? Am I unwanted?
yeah,
So I
yeah,
think for us, just always reassuring him, no matter what you do, you're our son. There's
yeah.
nothing
No,
that
no
can
matter
change
what. I
that.
mean,
Mhm.
it's a big theme. I,
And I see it
I,
in his relationships where he tends to desire approval a lot and struggles with that, and worries about rejection.
yeah, these are all big. These are all big adoptee themes. I was totally unaware of my trauma stuff till I hit 40.
Mhm.
Um, I felt not good enough at business sometimes.
Mhm.
Um, that kind of drove me on to get better at it.
Mhm.
And then I finally had a good year in business, and it didn't do what I thought it was going to do for me. And that was around the time that I found out about the teddy bear being from my birth mother, and that's when the feelings of the feelings that that's when the thought first popped into my head that
Mhm.
she didn't love me.
Mhm.
But I I never had that thought in the first 40 years.
Yeah. Well, I think for him, it's been important to have those conversations so that it can be worked out,
Yeah,
internally. And I think we can all have those kind of things. Our parents can, easily. Um,
Yeah, there's a best-selling book,
Feelings.
isn't it? Our
Mhm.
parents screw us up. I think it's called something like that, right?
And so I mean, and I know I'm never going to be perfect as a parent, but we try really hard to have conversations, just have open conversations and let our kids know that it's always okay to express how you feel
Yeah,
in a obviously in a healthy manner, not
yeah,
throwing a tantrum or um, hitting your brother, but they're always okay to come to us and have a conversation. And we try to have a lot of those hard conversations deliberately so that it develops that pattern of feeling safe to talk to us about those
yeah,
feelings.
yeah. I had the anger. I just couldn't
Hmm.
see that adoption
What
was
it
the
was
reason
caused
for
by.
it. Yeah.
Yeah. I
And
don't think that's uncommon at all.
no, no. I interview a lot of adoptees of my generation, and we talk about coming out of the fog, which is
Hmm.
realizing adoption's effect on us that we hadn't seen before.
Hmm.
So we come out of the fog. We couldn't see it.
Yeah.
We couldn't see it as a factor. We were blind to
Right.
it
Yeah.
until we weren't, and that tends to be middle age, right?
Yeah. And I think, would you agree that it's maybe harder to process that anger, for some when you're older and don't have that time to kind of grow into it and grow into the ideas. I don't know, it just seems like a lot of the adults struggle more with that anger, but maybe it's because they're never validated and never given that chance to say it's okay to feel it.
Um, that's a really great question, Kim. I I think that I didn't. My mum and dad didn't invalidate my feelings. I
Yeah,
think that was
they
it.
did.
I don't think they did that. And it wasn't about them. I think this is one of the biggest questions. Is the adoption about the kid or is the adoption about the
Mm.
parents? And
Yeah.
for parents who think it's, and nobody's going to admit to it. Oh, right, yeah,
Hmm.
it's about us, yeah.
Yeah,
But people know in the heart of hearts
sure.
whether it's about them or it's about the kids. So I, I also think that I think that what gets blamed on the primal wound is often really a product of poor parenting.
Yeah, that's kind of where I was going with that. Is it the parents that are just kind of saying you should be lucky, you should be grateful, and
What?
you're
Yeah,
because
yeah. So
you seem to be able to deal with it more. Not that you ever didn't feel emotions, but as you've also said, your parents did validate your emotions. They
yeah, well,
did allow you the space more.
they didn't invalidate them, and
Hmm.
I also think that the primal wound is a spectrum. So I talk about this. At one end of the spectrum, it's a paper cut.
Hmm.
At the in the middle of the spectrum, it needs three stitches,
Hmm.
and at the other end of the spectrum, it's like a shark attack. Right?
Right.
I think my primal wound was more like a paper cut. So and then I got lucky with my parents, but I didn't feel gratitude was not expected of me.
Sure.
My parents never expected gratitude for me to be grateful. Um, and I didn't grow up thinking, "Oh, how lucky I am." I mean,
But do you
that's
think
not
maybe
how.
that's why that was more of a paper cut, is what I was kind of getting at? Because I hear people talk about just, I was raised being told I should be grateful and that, that I was lucky and that, parents talking badly about their birth family and those adults who seem to be raised that way seem to really struggle with kind of
Yeah,
overcoming that anger and those feelings because they're not given that.
yeah. I think for me, I just have to shift metaphors slightly, right?
Mm-hmm.
So to me, trauma feels like a layer cake,
Mm-hmm.
right? So there's some generational trauma. So for example, I found out that my birth father, my biological father, his mum died in childbirth, not giving birth to him, but giving birth to one of his siblings, and the three siblings were in and out of care, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there's some generational trauma from that, and I've also connecting with a cousin on Saturday at the weekend. I found out that my biological mother's family were a little bit on the yeah, they weren't very emotionally intelligent. Let's just put it that way. And so there's some generational trauma going on there. Then there's the in utero trauma, like a mum carrying a baby,
Mm-hmm.
knowing that she's going to have to place it, right? So there's some stress around.
Mm-hmm.
There's some cortisol there, right? Then there's the relinquishment trauma, and oh yeah, so then there's before that there's some kind of like any trauma that goes on prior to the relinquishment, right? So if there's been neglect, abuse, right, and then there's relinquishment trauma, and then there's how we're raised. So there's probably about five things there. So if
Yeah.
you think about it like a layer cake,
Yeah.
some of those layers are really thin, and and some of the layers, everybody's cake is different.
Sure.
But the thicker the layers, the higher the higher
And probably the harder it is
the higher
to.
the cake. So all these things, and they multiply. I think they multiply rather than
Mhm.
just being added to one another. Does that
No, that
kind
makes
of
absolute
make
sense.
sense? That's as best as I can kind of see it. So I had so my relinquishment trauma was a thin layer of cake, and
Mhm.
my parenting was a I got lucky, so I had a thin layer
Mhm.
of parenting trauma cake.
So less layers to deal with, and
Less layers and smaller layers. So, for
Mhm.
example, I can keep on going on this, right? So, the the transracial adoption piece
Mhm.
that adds another layer of complexity,
Right.
which I was completely missing because I was a white guy adopted by white folks. And then you've also got that you can also have that international
Right.
trauma. So they're away from the motherland. They're away from that.
Yeah.
So all these factors kind of build up, and
Mhm.
it sounds like it sounds a worrying metaphor. The hope for me is in the truth that we're not the cake, we're the cake stand.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like
I
the
think,
the
well, and
the,
I
the
think,
fundamental disidentification. We are not our trauma. We are not our psychology. We are not our feelings. So
yeah. Well, and I think there are things that you can do to help those layers
sure,
to be smaller, you know,
sure.
just having an open adoption, I would think would maybe, you know, depending on the relationship, can really
Yes.
help if you still have that connection maintained.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a great way of putting it, Kim. So I think that back in the 60s, mine was a closed adoption.
Mhm.
I do think that the the relinquishment trauma slide cake,
Mhm.
the the relinquishment trauma layer is going to be smaller
Sure.
with open adoptions than it is with closed adoptions. That's
Yeah.
kind of what I'm trying to get at.
Yeah. And even I've heard, you know, I know adoptees who have met their birth family and made their own choice to sever that connection. But I would think even that is helpful in that, they had that option as opposed to just having it taken from you and you never knew and you never got to meet them or never got to see them.
Yeah, the
And
the control,
mhm. And I
the
think,
control is a big thing. Yes.
yeah. And even you saying like in utero, perhaps maybe even, a birth mom meeting the family and choosing the family and having comfort and peace in it a little more. They're going to have grief, yes, and pain,
Yes.
but definitely better than
Brilliant
where
point.
you're coming from back in the maternity home days where
Yeah.
I mean, I remember reading a file one time. It was just horrifying. This poor woman went from Ohio to Michigan to have her to stay while she was pregnant with a family member because you hid it. And then the poor woman had to drive her baby back to Cincinnati to the maternity home and hand that baby over. And I can just imagine what was happening, and how she was feeling. And the nuns were judgmental because the baby had was in a wet diaper when she handed him over. And I'm thinking, the poor woman, her focus was just getting there and ripping off the Band-Aid would be my guess, not stopping and changing diapers in the process of the way, And so that's going to cause, I would think, much more of that layer. I love that analogy. I think it's really helpful.
Yeah.
Um,
I totally
so
agree.
so those are things, it gives us things that we can do proactively to help the
Yeah,
adoptee with that.
and one of the biggest things that we can see is that their trauma isn't our fault.
Right.
It's got nothing to do with us, and we plow all our energy
Hmm.
in to the stuff that you've been talking about. The open
Hmm.
conversations, the the exploration of
Hmm.
feelings, the validation of the validation of those feelings as early as possible.
Hmm.
Um, I think one of the challenges in amongst adult adoptees, where the feelings are validated, right? And that keeps us stuck. I had
Absolutely.
I had an email this morning off a executive director in an adoption agency here in the UK, and he doesn't want to come on the podcast because he'd rather be under the radar,
Hmm.
and n- because so many people are trauma dumping and
Yeah.
will come for him if he.
Yeah. I had somebody make some comments on a post I made the other day and, very angry. Um, Basically saying, all adoptions are wrong. A child is always better with their birth family, even if they're separated for a while. I don't know where it was coming from. Probably, you know,
I know exactly where it's coming from.
possibly foster care type situation.
It
But
was coming from trauma.
yeah, oh
It
yeah,
was, it
I
was
know
trauma
that. I
speaking.
meant,
Yeah.
I don't know what her situation was,
No,
but
no.
she was angry and saying it's never, and it's, that's common to have those kind of, like you said, that's that trauma dumping,
The trauma dumping and
almost
their
using social media as their therapy and their way of processing,
yeah,
but it's not the most healthy way.
but it's about venting. It doesn't
Yeah.
it doesn't process. It doesn't.
Well, and I try to, we talk about that with our clients because sometimes they'll say, should I feel, I mean, I admit it, sometimes I go on social media and when I see what people are saying, I think, am I wrong? Was I wrong to adopt my children? Was I wrong to start um, Cradled in Grace? But I also try to remember, what I tell clients is listen to what they're saying and try to see through some of that trauma and anger and say, what can I do to like we're talking about. What can I do to do better so that my child doesn't feel this way? Um, do I think every adoption or in every case a child's better? No, I don't. I think there are situations, this person was very convinced that adoption's always just a temporary poverty or temporary situation. And she said most people that relinquish, it's just temporary and it'll resolve in 18 months. And I would say in our experience, that's not true. Um, most of the women that our clients are matching with are in serious addiction situations, often homeless, and I don't think they're going to resolve. I worked in addiction as a social worker for years, and the average person goes into treatment 5 to 6 times before it's effective. So you're talking years and years. And no, I don't think that's probably the best thing for the child. But can we keep an open relationship with healthy boundaries with that person, even in addiction? Yes. Can we maintain that link to help it be healthier for the child? Yes. I think there's ways we can learn from that anger and trauma without necessarily letting it convince us that it's always wrong, without going to those extremes. But it doesn't mean that we shouldn't listen either.
I'm with you. And sorry, Kim, I spoke over you there a couple of minutes ago.
Oh, sorry.
I want to apologize for that. That was
Oh,
me
that's
speaking
okay.
over you. Um, I'm totally with you. But it just think only one person in like 600 odd episodes, and because we've done it myself, I have had a conversation with you before we had this conversation. So in 1,200 plus conversations with potential guests and the guests that when the guests came on, I've only been asked if I'm pro adoption once, and I said it depends. And because I was having a genuine conversation with
Hmm.
somebody else, a one-to-one conversation, they were okay with me saying it depends.
I,
But a
I would
lot,
agree with that.
yeah, but a lot of people aren't okay with
Right.
it depends. They're looking for right or wrong. They're looking for
Right.
black and white. They're
Yeah.
not happy in the grey. They haven't got capacity for the grey. They've
Sure.
something's going on
Yeah.
for them.
Right.
Yeah, and or they've had so whatever's happened. Maybe so my adoption. So maybe that what that person is saying is my adoption was bad, and therefore all adoptions are bad.
Right.
But we're grown-ups. We know what.
Right. We know that there's just sure in a perfect world, everybody could be helped and it would all get better, but it's just not going to, and we have to know that. But do I think there are times when it shouldn't happen? Absolutely. I think there are times when women are coerced into it. I think there's times when they're pushed into it by family
Yeah,
or professionals who are taking advantage of vulnerable women. I think there's times they could have been given resources and support. And it's one of the things we focus on. We're consultants. We walk through clients through providing a lot of education about these kind of things and then making sure that the agencies we partner with are really taking care of these women and making sure that it is the last option because it should be. I believe it should be the absolute last option. Does it make it bad if it has to happen? Yes, there's going to be trauma. It doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad thing. Um, sometimes I think it does need to happen, but it should be the last resort. The
yeah,
family should stay intact if
yeah.
possible.
I got a, I got a, because I've connected with three biological cousins now, right? But
Hmm.
the first two that I connected were on my birth father's side. The one that's connected with on Saturday is from my um, birth mother's side. And I got an insight into how much pressure that was one
Hmm.
of the biggest things. I was on the Zoom with him for like 2 hours. It went like it went like so quick. And but he was really anxious about the call because he wanted to give me loads of information, but he didn't have a lot of information to give me because he didn't really have a lot of memories of my birth mother Pat. She stayed in. She stayed in England, and this guy that I spoke to, Ross's dad, my birth mother's brother, he took the family overseas to get
Mm.
away. One of the reasons was to get away from the family. He said that he shared some really stupid story, a sad story that brought it home for me. My he said my so Ross is talking about his dad and his two aunties, including Pat's my birth mother. They used to go to their grandparents every week for a meal. The three kids went for it, and then a few days after they'd come back from having tea at their grandparents, the granddad sent their dad a bill for the eggs that the kids had consumed. So there's some serious, it's some seriously not so
Yeah.
stuff going on there. Um, and this was a very authoritarian, very traditional, very Victorian English vibe
Mm.
culture that existed in that in that family. So I'd I'd sensed the pressure for me to be placed before I was born.
Hmm.
Reading through the documentation that I got when I
Hmm.
got my adoption file, but I actually felt that
Yeah.
authoritarian vibe
Hmm.
from my from Ross, my cousin. I got
Sure.
a better sense of quite how much pressure Pat must have been under to
Yeah.
place to place a place her unborn baby because the plan was made before, right? It
And it
wasn't
was pretty
personal.
common back then
It
all over. I
was.
mean, all those files I
It
was
was.
reading, that was the women were very often pushed into it by their fathers or
Yeah.
I remember one lady, she was 30-year-old widow and had a 10-year-old, and the nuns told her if she didn't do it, that not only would she be unable to show her face and be shamed, so would her 10-year-old daughter.
Yeah.
That so there was a lot of coercion in it at that
Yeah.
time.
And the pressure put upon the birth mothers, the expectant mothers, by their families and by the institutions, I guess.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Well, I hope we continue to work towards making it better with
Yeah.
it. It still
That's
has to happen at times, kind of finding ways to make it better to get those layers
yeah.
smaller and smaller.
Yeah. 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 So I mean, we've looked at those strategies would be the wrong word, but let's the three the ways of reducing the depth of the layer cake.
Hmm.
Open communication, validating their feelings,
I think
open adoption.
open adoption, and maybe even, I've thought of when you were talking about one of those layers, that relinquishment, that just that early bonding with the adoptive mother, even while maintaining the link with the birth mother. I think there's situations where babies are left in NICU for days, kind of in limbo, and that's not healthy. That causes trauma. I remember my middle son, he was placed in cradle care, which is like private foster care, knowing, until they found a family. So he went from his birth mother for 2 days to cradle care. He was in daycare while he was in cradle care. So then he was going to a third caregiver. And then at 3 weeks old, he was placed with us. And he struggled. We had a lot of struggle with bonding for about the first 3 months of his life. But, I said that poor little kid didn't know which way was up. He didn't know who to bond with. I was his fourth caregiver in 3 weeks of life consistently. So every time he bonded, he was taken from someone. And things like that, getting an adoptive family in place and having them there, I think makes a big difference there at the hospital so that there is bonding with both mothers. I would think would reduce some of that layer
Yeah,
in that
for
transition.
sure. For sure. I went into short-term foster care, and then my birth mother had to come and collect me. This is according to the files, right? Then my
Mhm.
birth mother had to collect me from that short-term foster care and take me to the agency. So I lost her, I got her back, and then I lost her again. But this happened all happened between the ages of 0 and 5 weeks.
Right.
So
But it still has an effect. Like I said, my son was
it's
3 weeks old
it's
and it made a difference.
yeah, yeah.
I can remember for about 3 months, he wouldn't look you in the eye. He wouldn't snuggle into you. He just kind of was stiff and
Wow.
it was very distinct and I can remember the exact moment he finally bonded with me. I mean, I remember it clearly
Yeah,
because I was just so distraught and just praying so hard that it would happen. And I can remember just feeling his little body relax into me. But that took, almost 3 months um, because of that trauma that he was put through in those first 3 weeks.
yeah. It was a softening of his body.
I could just feel him. Yeah, he would be rigid when I held him, and he wouldn't snuggle into me. You couldn't calm him. He would just cry, and he couldn't be soothed. And he would make eye contact with you. He was stiff, and then all of a sudden, I could just felt him kind of, over my shoulder, kind of soften into my neck and calm, and you could just feel the difference in the way he held himself. And that was when
Wow.
he finally started making eye contact and cooing and babbling and doing things that babies do. Prior to that, he was just very, very unattached and distant. Um, he was actually behind on all his milestones by almost exactly 3 months. It was like that development was even arrested during that time.
Yeah.
But I can't
Incredible.
imagine, that poor baby was just with so many caregivers
Mm,
and pulled from one to another so much.
yeah. As you share that story, I think about something I came up with a few months back in terms of how creative our brains are, right? So, and I think we uh, we can't because we can't remember. I can't remember
Hmm.
those 5 weeks
Sure.
clearly, right? So my mind can make a mountain out of a molehill or a molehill out of a mountain, and I still don't know which it is.
Hmm.
I still don't know how big the hill is. And I think that one of the things that can happen if we're kind of egged on, right? If we're this happens in adoptee groups, is that we can just make it bigger and bigger and bigger. Um, and that scares the SH1T out of me.
Yeah. Yeah, they kind of can sometimes I see that where it's getting each other kind of stuck in that anger and stuck in that because of that.
It fuels it.
Hmm.
And then I've seen this happen in groups that where some adopted parents are in as well,
Hmm.
uh, and it scares them. I mean, it scares me. It must scare them too.
Sure.
You've seen that, yeah?
Yeah.
You've been scared. can't finish it on that bit, can we, Kim?
No. Something a little more positive than that.
Yeah. How has raising your three boys, or how is raising your three boys impacting what you do at Cradled and Grace?
uh, I think definitely just watching what they go through has driven me more and more towards wanting to educate our families and prepare them well. When I started Cradle and Grace, I did what I knew, which was not much. I mean, I cringe at how poorly prepared I was for our first adoption and how poorly educated I was. And some of my views, frankly, were against everything we're talking about. And because no one ever told me differently. And so I think, I started right after about the second year after I started Cradled and Grace is when I added a birth mom educator. And then little by little added a transracial adoption educator and some other, sources, additional open adoption education. And just really working harder to prepare the families for all sides of the triad and to understand the dynamics and understand that how complicated and multi-layered it is. I think people go into this expecting rainbows and unicorns, and I always tell people it can be a beautiful thing. I love my family. I have three unique, beautiful sons, and I love that our family. I mean, sometimes I think it's a, a beautiful thing that our family doesn't match and that we are all just so unique and we come from so many different places and we've made it into one extended family unit, including birth families. And I love that. My oldest son's grandmother sends all three of my boys gifts, not just Micah. I think that can be a beautiful thing, but it's not all rainbows and unicorns. It is hard sometimes. There's a lot of layers and it requires a lot of intentional effort and work at times, just like anything else. I mean, look at a marriage. Marriage can be beautiful, but it doesn't just happen. You have to be engaged and you have to work at it. And I think adoption's the same way, but people don't go into it with that view sometimes. So I've just worked really hard to make sure that they understand that and that they're well prepared.
Yeah.
And at times families don't like it. We get pushback at times. Families want to sprint to the matching. That's always the goal. I want to get to matching so we can start trying to find the right mom and find the right match. And we always tell them it's not a sprint. We have to slow down and work hard at this and prepare you well before you get there.
Yeah. Is there anything that you'd like to share that I've not asked you about, Kim?
I can't think of anything off the top of my
Yeah,
head. I
sure.
really appreciate these conversations and just, continuing to learn. It's a big thing. Sometimes I'll get, well, our home study made agency made us do this education. And, my mantra is always, look, I was a social worker for almost 20 years. I've adopted three children. The oldest is now 13. I've done this for 10 years with Cradle and Grace, and I'm still learning. I'm still learning from conversations with people like you. We just added new education 2 years ago. I went through it and learned from it. So I think just people should always try to keep listening to different voices and learning,
Yeah,
and trying to do better.
yeah,
Adoption's come a long way in the last handful of decades, and I hope it continues to at least improve in the way we approach it.
yeah. So true. Thanks, Kim.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Simon. I appreciate you having me.
Thank you. Thanks, listeners. Speak to you soon. Bye bye.